A little English church near the Milton family estate has a stained glass window that links the great poet John Milton with Caedmon, the earliest English poet, and King David, the greatest lyricist of the Old Testament. Milton's high reputation can be understood by looking at historical material, listening to his poetry, and hearing accounts of Milton by himself.
I was born at London, of an honest family, in that charming city which is the capital of cities, staffed, I might say, to corpulence with all the pleasures in which that place overflows beyond measure.
John Milton was born in 1608 on Bread Street in central London, where he grew up a true Cockney, within the sound of the bells of St. Mary le Bow. This church was rebuilt by Sir Christopher Wren after the Great Fire of London of 1666 that destroyed most of central London, including the Milton home, which probably resembled the nearby Staple Inn, which survived. Some of the most beautiful frame houses and shops within the walls of London were on Bread Street.
My father was a man of the highest integrity who destined me from a child for the pursuits of polite learning, which I pursued with such eagerness that after I was 12 years old, I rarely retired to bed till midnight, the first thing that proved pernicious to my eyes, to the natural weakness of which were added frequent headaches.
Milton's domineering father may have inspired the portrait of the all-powerful God the Father in Paradise Lost. Milton's blindness will become an important theme in Paradise Lost and in his play Samson Agonistes about the blind Old Testament hero. Milton gained mastery of Latin and Greek at St. Paul's School near the old cathedral, later destroyed in the Great Fire. This famous school was founded by John Colet, who was celebrated among Protestants as a forerunner of the Reformation, which Milton and his father both passionately supported. Milton also found time to relax from his studies.
Sometimes I found delight in the parts of the city where our citizens promenaded, sometimes in the neighboring countryside, adjoining country houses.
When Milton was 17, his father enrolled him in a Puritan college at Cambridge, a strongly Protestant university. Milton, like his father, favored the individualistic religious views of the Puritans. The Puritan movement was largely a movement against the patriarchal authority of the Roman Pope, and also against most ecclesiastical establishments, such as the Anglican Church, headed by King Charles I.
Being now instructed in various languages, my father sent me to Cambridge. There, aloof from all profligate conduct and with the approbation of all good men, I studied at Christ's College for 7 years until I obtained the degree of master.
When Milton arrived in this college, he was already 16. But of course, he'd had a thoroughly good grounding in classics, Latin and Greek, before coming here at St. Paul's School in London. But his earliest poems, naturally in those days, were written in Latin, splendid Latin. There's another thing it's important to remember about the education of Milton's days as a student. A lot of the teaching was done in the form of a debate. The early poems were exercises. And two very well-known ones make a pair, L'Allegro, which is all about mirth and jollity, and Il Penseroso, which is about philosophy, melancholy, and the other side of life. The point is that he could do both at the same time because of the debating technique.
Puritan education at Cambridge, led by Emmanuel College, was influential in American education. For instance, Emmanuel College graduate John Harvard founded the distinguished university named after him in Massachusetts. Many mementos of Milton's education are kept by his College of Christ's, which is next door to Emmanuel College.
This is an apt occasion to acknowledge publicly, with all grateful mind, that more than ordinary favour and respect, which I found above any of my equals, at the hands of these courteous and learned men, the fellows of that College of Christ's.
Milton's devotion to the Puritan cause was confirmed at Cambridge. The countryside around it was full of towns, such as St. Ives, which still displays its support of the great Puritan leader Oliver Cromwell. As always, Milton loved country walks.
Sometimes walking not unseen by hedgerow elms on hillocks green, straight mine eye hath caught new pleasures, while the landscape round it measures. Sometimes with obscure delight the upland hamlets will invite, and young and old come forth to play on a sunshine holiday.
This charming country church is in Horton, a little village outside London. After leaving Cambridge, Milton withdrew here to live in his father's country house. The church contains many memorials and records of the Milton family. Being perfectly at ease, Milton gave himself up to reading the Greek and Latin writers who inspired his pastoral poetry.
And when the sun begins to fling his flaring beams, me, goddess, bring to arched walks of twilight groves, and shadows brown that sylvan loves, of pine or monumental oak, and the waters murmuring.
At Horton, Milton wrote Lycidas, a pastoral elegy for his dead classmate Edward King. Milton later wrote a pastoral titled Arcades for the Egerton family. At Ludlow Castle on the Welsh border, the Egerton family next commissioned a celebration of the appointment of John Egerton, Earl of Bridgewater, to be Lord President of Wales. The castle was his administrative headquarters, near a tributary of the great river Severn. Milton wrote for him a piece known today as Comus, another pastoral, in a form called a masque.
It was an entertainment with lighting, beautiful scenery, dancing and music. It's interesting to look at it from the point of view of the people that watched it and took part in it, because they were one and the same people. It was really a great excuse for a dance on the part of the aristocracy of Britain at that time.
List, lady, be not coy, and be not cozened with that same vaunted name, virginity. Beauty is nature's coin, must not be hoarded, but must be current, and the good thereof consists in mutual and partaken bliss, unsavoury in the enjoyment of itself. If you let slip time, like a neglected rose, it withers on the stalk with languished head.
Back, shepherds, back, enough your play, till the next sunshine holiday. Hear me, without jock or nod, are the trippings to be trod, of lighter tones and such cohort skies, as Mercury did first devise, with the mincing dryads, all the lawns and all the leas. Noble lord and lady bright, I have brought you new delight. Here behold, so goodly grown, 3 fair branches of your own. In that timely tried their youth, their faith, their patience, and their truth, and sent them here through harder seas with a crown of deathless praise, to triumph in victorious times.
Starting in Pisa, Milton began a journey through Italy which would significantly influence his life and writings.
I had the curiosity to see foreign countries, and above all, Italy. Taking ship, I arrived at Pisa, thence to Florence, which I have always valued above the rest for the elegance of its dialect and of its genius. There it was that I found and visited the famous Galileo grown old. And there by night the glass of Galileo observes imagined lands and regions in the moon whose orb through optic glass the Tuscan artist views at evening from the top of Faesulae, or in Valdarno, to descry new lands, rivers, or mountains in her spotty globe.
These lines from Paradise Lost indicate the new scientific discoveries which Milton preferred to the archaic scientific theory of Ptolemy. In fact, he puts the new sun-centered theories of the astronomer Copernicus into the speeches of the archangel Raphael. But the ancient Romans most influenced Milton in Italy.
I pursued my route to Siena and then to Rome, detained in this city by its antiquities and ancient renown.
In Milton's Puritan view, Rome's pagan and papal values were equally the devil's handiwork. He has Satan praising Rome to Jesus in Paradise Regained.
The city which thou seest no other deem than great and glorious Rome, queen of the earth, so far renowned, and with the spoils enriched of nations. The structure skill of noblest architects, with gilded battlements conspicuous far, turrets and terraces, and glittering spires.
When the devils build the palace of pandemonium in hell in Paradise Lost, Milton describes St. Peter's in Rome.
Anon out of the earth a fabric huge rose like an exhalation, with the sound of dulcet symphonies and voices sweet, built like a temple, where pilasters round were set and Doric pillars overlaid with golden architrave, nor did there want cornice or frieze with bossy sculptures graven. The roof was fretted gold. Not Babylon nor great Al-Cairo, such magnificence equaled in all their glories.
Milton spoke vigorously in defense of Protestantism against the papacy throughout his Italian tour, at some risk of punishment to himself for questioning Roman Catholicism on its home ground.
I proceeded to Naples and to Venice. As I was preparing to pass over to Sicily and Greece, I was restrained by the melancholy tidings from England of the Civil War, for I thought it base that I should be traveling abroad while my fellow citizens were fighting for their liberty at home. I therefore returned and wrote several books.
Milton's writing now took the form of political pamphleteering for the Puritans, led by Oliver Cromwell and other graduates of Cambridge. By contrast, the university town of Oxford became the center of royalist support for King Charles I and his French Catholic wife, whom the Puritans opposed. In 1642, when he was 34, Milton journeyed to Oxford and within a month married Mary, daughter of the staunchly royalist Powell family. She soon left him. He then wrote his pamphlets advocating the legalization of divorce.
I explained my sentiments not only on the proper mode of contracting marriage, but also of dissolving it, should that be found necessary at that particular time when man and wife were often the fiercest enemies. Lastly, I wrote of the liberty of printing, of what ought to be published and what suppressed.
As the Puritan Revolution evolved, the king's ministers were executed, his armies defeated, and finally the king was captured by the parliamentarians, whose cause was defended by Milton.
When the king, pronounced an enemy of the parliament and vanquished in war, was arraigned as a captive before judges and condemned to lose his head, I showed what may lawfully be done against tyrants.
Cromwell headed the new Commonwealth government, for whom Milton was Latin secretary.
Cromwell, our chief of men, who through a cloud not of war only, but detractions rude, guided by faith and matchless fortitude, to peace and truth thy glorious way hath ploughed, and on the neck of crowned fortune proud hath reared God's trophies and his work pursued.
So hard did Milton work at translating official documents that his weakened sight finally failed completely. Bitterly, he was forced into retirement. His successor was a fellow Cambridge graduate, Andrew Marvell, now known for the famous lyrics To His Coy Mistress and The Garden. Milton's whole future seemed to fade with his sight.
When I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days in this dark world and wide, doth God exact day labor light denied? I fondly ask. But patience, to prevent that murmur, soon replies, God doth not need either man's works or his own gifts. They also serve who only stand and wait.
Milton patiently concentrated on his epic poem, while the Commonwealth collapsed after Cromwell's death. Milton savagely opposed the successful restoration of King Charles II to the throne, ending the power of the Puritans.
After our liberty and religion thus prosperously fought for and gained, and many years possessed, nothing remains but to creep back so poorly, as it seems the multitude would do, to their once abjured and detested thraldom of kingship, to be ourselves the slanderers of our own just and religious deeds.
Portraits of Prince Rupert show the dress of the Restoration Court, which was more elaborate than the Puritans. Before the Puritan Revolution, the royal architecture and pageantry was extravagant. The principal architect was Inigo Jones. After the Restoration, the elaborate style was continued in buildings designed by Sir Christopher Wren. Milton detested these royal extravagancies, and his defense of the execution of Charles I invited his own execution, a disaster averted probably through the skillful intervention of Andrew Marvell. During all these vicissitudes, Milton continued to reside in London, first near his employment in Westminster and St. Margaret's Church, then after the Restoration in St. Bartholomew's Parish, which still shows vestiges of Milton's time. Milton's resilience appears in his triumph over many severe losses, his blindness, the failure of the Puritan Commonwealth, and also the death of his first two wives. After the Puritans' defeat, Milton took refuge in his poetry, as he says to his muse in Paradise Lost.
Standing on earth, not wrapped above the pole, more safe I sing, with mortal voice unchanged to hoarse or mute, though fallen on evil days though fallen, and evil tongues, in darkness and with dangers compassed round, and solitude. Yet not alone while thou visitest my slumbers nightly, or when morn purples the east. Still govern thou my song, Urania, and fit audience find, though few, but drive far off the barbarous dissonance of Bacchus and his revellers.
Later, in 1665, Milton fled from the plague in London to a small country house at Chalfont St. Giles.
But we do know he finished Paradise Lost here. We do know that he was actively thinking about Paradise Regained. I suppose it's an irony of history that all other Milton homes, he owned none. He rented all of them. They're all destroyed by now. Only this one stands. And of course, scholars could make a big point about which one ought to be standing, the one with the strongest literary connection. But this one is very real. And I've often thought myself that the stirring passages about the garden and so on could very much have been a result of Milton's having lived here.
Milton's nephew, Edward Phillips, tells us that Paradise Lost was, quote, first designed as a tragedy. And in the fourth book of the poem, there are verses which were shown to me as designed for the very beginning of the said tragedy. Here, in a student dramatization, we see Satan as a tragic, epic hero.
O thou, that with surpassing glory crowned, look'st from thy sole dominion like the god of this new world. To thee I call, but with no friendly voice, and let me add thy name, O sun, to tell thee how I hate thy beams, that bring to my remembrance from what state I fell, how glorious once above thy sphere, till pride and worse ambition threw me down, warring in heaven against heaven's matchless king.
Milton chose the biblical theme of the fall of man over an earlier plan for an epic about Britain because he was disillusioned by the failure of the Puritan Commonwealth. Milton rejected the epic traditions of praise of heroic bloodshed and glorifications of the hero, whom he equates with Satan. Instead, Milton's epic climax deals with the marital relationship of Adam and Eve, enriched, no doubt, by his quarrel with his own first wife and their later reconciliation.
Is this the love? Is this the recompense of mine to thee, ingrateful Eve? Expressed immutable when thou art lost, not I, who might have lived, enjoyed immortal bliss, but willingly chose rather death with thee. Am I now upbraided as the cause of thy transgressing? Not enough severe, it seems, in thy restraint. What could I more? I warned thee, I admonished thee, foretold the danger and the lurking enemy. But confidence then bore thee on, secure either to meet no danger or to find matter of glorious trial.
Unlike the rigid and sterile Satan, Adam and Eve transcend adversities, and their love provides the origins of the human race.
No more be mentioned then of violence to ourselves, or willful barrenness, that cuts us off from hope, and savors only rancor and pride, impatience and despite, reluctance against God, and his just yoke laid about our necks. Remember with what mild and gracious temper he both heard and judged, without wrath or reviling.
Later, Milton wrote a shorter epic, Paradise Regained, about the peaceful mission of Jesus Christ, who has much of the seriousness of the youthful John Milton. Then he wrote a true classical drama about the last days of the blind Samson, with whom Milton deeply empathizes. In his last years, until his death in 1674, Milton lived peacefully in London in the parish of St. Giles of Cripplegate, which contains his father's tomb and his own, as well as other memorials to him and other Puritan worthies, such as Bunyan and Cromwell. Milton is commemorated in several places in the church. Since Chaucer, Westminster Abbey has memorialized writers in the famous Poets' Corner. Here, Milton occupies a high place. Like the blind Samson, Milton finally triumphs.
All is best, though we oft doubt what the unsearchable dispose of highest wisdom brings about, and ever best found in the close. his servants he, with new acquist of true experience from this great event, with peace and consolation hath dismissed, and calm of mind, all passion spent.
Now my task is smoothly done. I can fly or I can run quickly to the earth's green end, where the boat will in slow doth bend, and from thence can soar as soon to the corners of the moon. Mortals that would follow me